So, what if the government just banned big companies from buying up single-family houses? It's a pretty radical idea that's getting a lot of attention. But the real question is, would it actually help regular people buy a home, or would it just be a drop in the bucket? Let's get into it.
And really, this one sentence pretty much sums up the whole emotional core of the debate, right? It frames it as a simple choice. Are homes for people to live in, or are they just another asset for a corporation's balance sheet? It's a powerful idea. But what does the data actually say? Okay, so here's the actual plan on the table. A federal ban to stop corporations from buying up single-family homes. The goal, obviously, is to give individual buyers a better shot. But would it really work? To figure that out, we have to look at the numbers.
To really understand if this is a potential game changer or, just a lot of noise, we have to see how big of a player corporations actually are in the housing market. So let's start with the big national picture.
You hear this number a lot when people talk about this issue, 2%. And on its face, that sounds, pretty tiny, doesn't it? But what does that 2% actually represent? Let's dig in a little bit deeper.
So that 2% translates to about 300,000 single-family homes owned by corporations. Now, don't get me wrong, 300,000 houses is a lot of houses, but it's still just a small slice of the entire national rental market. So from that 30,000-foot view, you have to ask, is this really a big deal?
Well, when you look at that 2% number, it's really no surprise that some financial experts are pretty skeptical. They basically argue that from a national perspective, taking those corporate buyers out of the market, it just wouldn't move the needle much at all. It's almost a rounding error.
But here is the critical question. Is a national average the right way to even look at this? Or does that tiny 2% actually hide a much more complicated and, frankly, a much more impactful story happening at the local level?
So we're going to leave that big picture view behind for a minute and get right down to the street level in specific cities. Because believe me, when we do that, the picture changes dramatically.
And this is where things get really wild. Look at this. While the national average is that tiny 2%, you go to a city like Memphis, and suddenly corporations own a staggering 25% of the single-family homes. Let that sink in. That's 1 out of every 4 houses. In St. Louis, it's over 20%. All of a sudden, that 2% figure feels pretty misleading, doesn't it?
And it's not just an anomaly in 1 or 2 cities either. We see a really similar pattern in places like Kansas City, San Antonio, and Birmingham, where corporate ownership is bumping up against that 20% mark. These are the real hotspots where you can feel the corporate presence on the ground.
So here's the most important takeaway from all this. That single national number can completely mask what's actually happening in neighborhoods. For someone trying to buy a home in one of these cities, the competition isn't some abstract 2%. No, it's a huge dominant force in their local market.
Okay, so if this ban actually became law, how would it play out? What would the real chain reaction be in those hotspot cities we just looked at? Let's try to trace that potential impact. All right, so here's the potential ripple effect. Step 1, the ban stops future corporate buys. That immediately takes a major cash-heavy buyer out of those specific markets. Step 2, with less competition, overall demand for homes could drop. And, basic economics tells us that less demand could lead to a softening of prices.
But, and this is a really big but, it's not a simple win for everybody. On one side of the coin, you have individual buyers in a city like Memphis. They'd suddenly face way less competition, maybe giving them a real shot at affording a home. But on the other side, home sellers in that same city now have a smaller pool of potential buyers, which could make it harder to sell their house for the price they were hoping for.
So, after looking at the national numbers and then zooming into those local realities, what's the big picture here? Is this ban some kind of silver bullet for the whole country, or is it something different? Let's just quickly recap what we figured out. First, this is not a fix for the entire country's housing crisis. That's for sure. Its impact would be almost entirely concentrated in those specific hotspot cities. It's also really important to remember this is all about future purchases, not forcing corporations to sell off what they already own. And finally, it definitely creates clear winners and losers within those targeted markets. So ultimately, this proposal is really best understood not as some sweeping national cure-all, but more like a surgical tool. It's designed to address a very specific problem that is incredibly intense in some communities while being almost a non-issue in others. And that leaves us with this final, much broader question to think about. When we're facing a nationwide issue like housing affordability, is the answer a single, one-size-fits-all policy? Or is the real answer a collection of targeted, local solutions just like this one? It's a huge debate, and it goes way beyond just this single proposal.